Welcome back, fellow goblins. My name's Lila, and today I am going to be talking about something super controversial in the reptile community, and that is whether or not it is okay to breed spider ball pythons. So, what is a spider ball python? A spider ball python is a ball python that has a specific morph that is very, very popular in the reptile community because it is like very aesthetically pleasing, but it is super controversial because all of these snakes have a neurological disorder called wobble. Now, what wobble is essentially a disorder of their inner ear that causes a lot of issues with balance. I've heard people try and argue that this isn't a neurological issue because it is a inner ear deformity. That is objectively false. This directly impacts their brain. How, you might ask? Because the inner ear is actually a part of the vestibular system, the organs that control balance, and it's not just the inner ear, it's also the cerebellum. It's all of that stuff in the brain, because it's directly connected, that affect their balance and ability to balance. So this wobble actually will make it so that they have things like corkscrewing, where they're moving their head around. They have a difficult time of orienting themselves. It can cause difficulty eating. It can cause difficulty, again, like navigating their enclosure. It can cause a lot of difficulty and really affect their quality of life. But an argument that a lot of people make, unfortunately, is that, well, not all of them are as affected as others. Some of them can live long, happy lives even though they have a slight wobble. So wobble affects 100% of the spider gene. It will be present no matter what at varying degrees. So no matter what, this will be present. It cannot be bred out of the spider gene. So now is the part where I'm going to explain ethics. Ethics, again, is something very hotly debated in reptile keeping because ethics is inherently subjective, right? What I think is ethical, you might not think is ethical. It is highly, highly subjective, right? I am trying to back my ethics in reptile keeping, and I think other people should try and back their ethics in reptile keeping with the recent data, with what studies show, and use that in order to formulate how they feel about things like breeding and keeping certain species and how to keep them. The reason I bring up that it's subjective is because, again, I'm not saying that what I say is, the right way no matter what. It is my perspective on what we should be doing based upon the scientific data that I have been presented with, right? And that is part of my job as a biologist, is to base my ethics upon updated recent data. And with that preamble, I am here to say that I do not think that it is okay to breed spider ball pythons. I do not think that we should be breeding spider ball pythons at all whatsoever. And what that comes down to is breeding for health and function versus breeding for aesthetics. Let's say that there is a clutch of spider ball pythons and half the clutch has a severe wobble, whereas the other half of the clutch doesn't. It's still present, but it isn't really affecting their quality of life that much. There's still half the clutch that is affected by it in a way that does impact their quality of life. And the reason for them being bred is because the color looks cool. So is it then therefore okay to breed something because they might have a good quality of life, despite the fact that at least some of them will not? Why is it okay to breed them based upon the fact that you think that it looks good, that it is a pleasing aesthetically, even though it affects their health and function? For me, I do not breed. I am not a breeder. My business partner, Goblin Queen Annalise, she breeds and she has, very good perspective on ethics and breeding as well. I hope one day we can make a video together about that. But for me, I don't breed. But that doesn't make me unqualified to speak about this because A, I am a biologist. I do have my degree in biology. So I understand the genetics portion of it at least. And B, I think that it's the responsibility of any reptile keeper to have, an ethical perspective on things like this, regardless of if they breed or not. If anything, they don't have a financial incentive if they're not breeding to have a perspective on this, because obviously if you are financially incentivized to continue breeding something because of a demand for it, your perspective is going to be a bit skewed. There are a couple things that I think are really important when it comes to breeding reptiles. One is establishing healthy captive populations with a diverse genome, right? So again, we're avoiding things like inbreeding, things like line breeding, breeding just for aesthetic reasons. And the other is meeting demand rather than overproducing, and that I acknowledge that is a little bit difficult because the demand for certain things in pet keeping is very volatile. It's very subject to change. But one thing that is a undisputable fact is that ball pythons are extremely overproduced. I cannot emphasize this enough. When you go to any reptile expo, there will be ball pythons everywhere. And because there are so many people producing ball pythons, there is such an overproduction of them that none of these animals are not being housed properly. These animals are not living fulfilling, enriching lives at the rate that they're being produced at. And I think that is something that is really important to consider when you want to get into something like breeding is, are you breeding this in order to meet a demand, or are you breeding this just because you feel like you have to? And I think that the constant breeding of ball pythons for different morphs is, and again, this is where ethics come in, being subjective. In my opinion, I think that it is inherently wrong because you're producing something for aesthetic, again, rather than health and functionality. And then there is a huge overproduction of these animals where they're not being housed properly, they're not having proper enrichment, they're not leading fulfilling lives, and oftentimes their lifespan is much shorter than it should be because of these reasons. And this all comes down to the spider ball python thing, because spider ball pythons are being bred because they look nice when, and they might not suffer when 100% of the gene is affected by this neurological disorder. So it's like, is it worth having, a cool looking snake where half of them might be suffering tremendously and the other half is mostly fine? Is it worth producing them just because they look cool when there are tons of other options? And the other piece of this is that there are a ton of rehoming pages, rescues that are, trying desperately to find homes for ball pythons, especially normal ball pythons, which I think are beautiful. My ball python is a rescue. His name is Bambo. He is a banana ball python. But there are, in my area alone, hundreds of ball pythons that are desperately trying to be rehomed because, again, of that overabundance of production and, of course, also impulse purchases. So this is something that is super important to consider. I don't think it's right to continue breeding spotted ball pythons. Just because some of them might be fine doesn't mean that you're not still having to, A, cull a large portion of them, and B, you're producing something that has a chance of having this neurological disorder really affect their quality of life. And just because it might not doesn't make it okay. There are tons of other options for beautiful reptiles. I personally think that the wild type of reptiles is really slept on. I think that, wild type ball pythons are beautiful. I think that wild type leopard geckos are beautiful. I love wild type hognose snakes. I think they're just absolutely gorgeous. And, this is just, I really want to emphasize that I think it's important to breed for health and functionality rather than breeding for aesthetics alone and then having, a portion of that population suffer just because they look nice. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts, whether you agree with me, whether you disagree with me. Again, I know this is a very controversial topic, and I do have lots of friends who are breeders. I personally am not a breeder of reptiles. I mean, I'm adding that little bit on the end there because I've made TikToks where people who aren't in the reptile community get confused what I'm talking about. The breeding of reptiles is what I'm talking about. But I have friends who breed ball pythons, and they firmly disagree with me on this. And this is again, it's very controversial, but for me, breeding something that has a health issue that can affect its quality of life and it's 100% present in the gene is not okay, and we shouldn't be doing it. Again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.